Are you planning a camping trip and quietly wondering if there is something obvious you are going to forget that will turn the whole thing sideways before you even get settled? There is. Probably more than one. The 12 mistakes I'm going to cover in this video are not obscure edge cases. They are the same ones that show up in every camping forum, at every campground, on every first or second trip people take when they are figuring this out, without anyone telling them what to watch for. I have made most of them myself at some point, across 20-plus years of car camping through the South and Southwest. And I can tell you from experience that a bad trip is almost never a weather problem or a gear problem. It is a decision problem, and most of those decisions could have been made differently in the driveway before you left home. And I have been running these trips long enough to know which problems repeat and which ones just feel bad in the moment. A thread on Camping Forum from a few years ago asked members to name the one mistake that cost them the most on their worst camping trip. Over 400 responses, and the same dozen things showed up over and over again. Not exotic survival situations, reservations not made, food left out, wrong sleeping bag, tent pitched in a drainage bowl. That list. This video is that list, with enough explanation behind each one that you understand why it happens and not just what to do differently. Stick around to the end because the last thing on here is the one most experienced campers never think to mention, and it has ruined more trips than any gear failure I have ever seen. Yes, the first mistake is not reserving your site before you leave. This one seems too obvious to say out loud until you are the person who drove 2.5 hours to a national forest campground on a Friday afternoon in October and found a full sign at the entrance. It happens more than you would think, and it happens to people who have been camping for years because they assume a spot will open up or because the campground was wide open the last time they came through in the off-season. Most developed campgrounds in national forests and state parks now run reservation systems through Reservation.gov and their state equivalents. On peak weekends from May through October, popular campgrounds can fill up weeks in advance. The Cherokee National Forest in Tennessee books out completely on fall foliage weekends by mid-September for October dates. If you show up without a reservation expecting to find a walk-in site, you are gambling and the odds are worse than they used to be. Book before you go. And when you are booking, do not just take the first available site without looking at what you are getting. Check the campground map in satellite view. You can see which sites are under tree cover, which are exposed, which sit close to bathroom facilities without being directly adjacent to the foot traffic, and which are in obvious low spots. Sites at the end of a loop have one neighbor instead of two, less foot traffic, and the same fee. 30 seconds of additional attention when you are booking consistently produces a better site than whatever is left when you select without looking. The second mistake is pitching the tent without checking the ground first. You pull in, find an open pad, stake the corners, and call it done. The problem is that ground pads at developed campgrounds are often not quite level, and what looks flat in the late afternoon light is sometimes a shallow bowl that collects water from every direction the moment it rains. A site with 2 to 3 degrees of slope, roughly the angle you would notice if you set a marble on the ground, and it rolled slowly toward one edge, drains rain away from the tent floor. A flat site pools water. A concave site becomes a shallow pond around your footprint. Yes, I have woken up at 2 a.m. in the Pisgah National Forest in North Carolina to the sound of rain and lifted my tent footprint the next morning to find standing water underneath the entire floor. The tent was fine. The site selection was not. Before you stake the first corner, walk the footprint area and find the low point. Position the tent so your head end is on the high side. Check for depressions, root mounds that create low spots between them, and areas where the soil looks compacted and darker, which usually indicates a drainage path. 2 minutes of evaluation before setup prevents the whole category of wet tent problems. Third mistake, related to the second, not using a footprint or using one that is the wrong size. A footprint, also called a ground cloth, is a piece of fabric that goes under the tent floor to protect it from punctures and ground moisture. The mistake people make is buying a ground cloth that is the same size as the tent floor or slightly larger. If the footprint extends beyond the tent floor perimeter by even half an inch, roughly the width of a thumbnail, it catches rain that falls outside the tent, channels it underneath the floor by capillary action, and collects it between the footprint and the floor. You end up wetter from your protective layer than you would have been without one. The footprint needs to sit inside the tent floor perimeter, at least an inch inside on every side, roughly the width of your index finger all the way around. Buy a brand-specific footprint cut for your tent model, or cut a tarp to fit inside the floor dimension. If you are using a generic ground cloth, fold the edges under rather than letting them extend outward. The fourth mistake is showing up without a backup plan for cooking when you cannot have a fire. Most campers plan their meals around a campfire. Most campgrounds have fire restrictions that activate during dry or windy conditions with zero notice. In summer across the Southwest California and most of the Mountain West, fire restrictions are not occasional. They are the default condition for weeks or months at a time. If your only cooking plan is the fire ring and the fire ring is off limits under a ranger district burn ban, you are eating cold food or you are driving to the nearest town to find something open. A 2-burner Coleman propane stove weighs about 7 pounds, roughly the weight of a bag of charcoal briquettes, and covers every cooking scenario a campfire would cover with more control and no restriction issues. I know campers who have been doing this for 20 years and still show up without a backup stove because they have never personally hit a fire restriction. They will. A propane stove is not extra gear. It is the primary cooking method on a trip where conditions are unpredictable, and your cooking plan should work regardless of whether you can have a fire. Fifth mistake is buying a sleeping bag rated to the temperature you expect rather than 10 to 15 degrees colder. This is one where the gear companies have not helped anyone, and I say that as someone who spent 3 seasons in a bag that was technically rated for the conditions I was camping in and still woke up cold on the same 2 nights of every fall trip. Sleeping bag temperature ratings from most manufacturers represent the lowest temperature at which an average sleeper in base layers on an insulated pad survives the night, not the temperature at which they sleep comfortably. The comfort rating is almost always warmer than the limit rating printed on the hang tag. A bag labeled 20 degrees Fahrenheit might have a comfort rating of 32 degrees. That is a 12-degree gap between what you think you bought and what you actually have. Overnight temperatures also vary more than forecasts suggest, especially at elevation. A campsite in the Colorado high country above 9,000 feet can drop 35 to 40 degrees between 4 p.m. and 4 a.m., regardless of what the daytime forecast said. The fix is straightforward. Whatever the lowest overnight temperature forecast says for your trip, buy or bring a bag rated at least 15 degrees colder than that number. If the low is 40 degrees Fahrenheit, you want a bag rated to 25 degrees or better. The bag will be warmer than necessary on mild nights. It will not fail you on cold ones. I ran a 35-degree bag on a shoulder season trip in the Ozark National Forest in Arkansas and spent the last 4 hours of one night in every piece of clothing I had brought, including the jacket I wore into the tent, specifically because I knew it was going to be cold. The bag was the problem. A bag rated 15 degrees colder would have been fine. I did not figure that out until the next morning. If you are getting something out of this, hit subscribe. More of these coming. Sixth mistake is leaving food out at the campsite. This is not just a bear country problem. And it is not just a problem for people camping in wilderness areas. Developed campgrounds with fire rings and picnic tables have raccoons, skunks, squirrels, and in some regions, foxes that have been conditioned over years of camper carelessness. A cooler left on a picnic table overnight is not secured food. A bag of chips left in a camp chair because someone was planning to finish it later is not secured food. Anything with a food smell, including candy wrappers, gum, toothpaste, sunscreen, and lip balm, needs to be in a sealed container in your vehicle or in a bear box if your site has one. Bear boxes are the locked metal storage lockers, roughly the size of a chest freezer, that some campgrounds provide at the site for exactly this purpose. In bear-active areas in national forests and national parks, storing food in your vehicle is the minimum acceptable practice, and some regulations require a bear canister, which is a hard-sided cylinder about the size of a large coffee can that food goes into when it cannot be stored in a vehicle. Check the specific regulations for the campground you are visiting before the trip. Losing food to a raccoon at 2 a.m. is annoying and expensive. Losing it to a bear means a campsite evacuation and potentially a dangerous situation for the next people who camp there after an animal has associated that location with a food reward. The smell problem is also more persistent than most people realize. Raccoons can detect food odors through cooler seals, through vehicle windows left cracked, and through tent fabric. The smell of dinner from the night before, on a camp chair, on your hands, or on clothing stored in the tent, is enough to draw them in. Clean the site, secure everything sealed, and assume the animals are more motivated and capable than you are giving them credit for. Seventh mistake, not having a reliable fire starting system and a backup. You show up with a lighter and find it is damp, or the flint is worn, or someone borrowed it and left it half empty. A lighter is a single point of failure. Your system should have at minimum a primary lighter or matches kept in a sealed bag, and a secondary option that works independently of the first. Waterproof matches in a sealed container are about $3 and last indefinitely. A ferro rod, which is a metal rod that produces sparks when struck with a scraper, costs around $8 to $12 and works wet, cold, or after years of storage. I also keep dryer lint stuffed into cardboard toilet paper rolls in a sealed Ziploc bag as fire starter. The lint and cardboard together catch a spark reliably and hold a flame long enough to establish kindling above them. I have started fires with this method in light rain, in the Bankhead National Forest in Alabama, when everything at the site was damp. The one failure mode is sustained rain before you use it, because the cardboard ends absorb moisture if the bag is left open. Seal the bag until you are ready to use it. For extra reliability, melt old candle wax and pour it into the lint-filled roll before the cardboard dries. The wax makes the starter weather-resistant and extends the burn time to about 4 minutes, which is long enough to get even stubborn or slightly damp wood going. That is the complete system. Primary ignition, a backup ignition, prepared tinder that works in less than ideal conditions. Not one of those. All three. Eighth mistake is ignoring the sleeping pad situation until the first morning when your back hurts and you cannot figure out why. The sleeping pad is not a comfort accessory. It is a thermal barrier. Conduction, which is heat transfer through direct contact, pulls warmth from your body into the cold ground about 25 times faster than convection pulls it into cold air. An uninsulated air mattress is actually worse than a foam pad for warmth because the air inside circulates, continuously replacing the warm air your body heats underneath you with cooler air from the edges. A closed-cell foam pad about 3/4 of an inch thick, roughly the depth of a thick paperback novel laid flat, has an R value of around 2 and costs $8 to $12. That pad does more thermal work for your sleep system than an extra $100 spent on a warmer sleeping bag. If you are using an uninsulated air mattress and sleeping cold, add a foam pad underneath it before you buy anything else. The foam handles the conduction problem, and the air mattress gives you the cushion. Run both, and you get the benefit of each. And if your self-inflating or air pad develops a slow leak at some point during a trip, which it will eventually, carry a repair patch. Tenacious tape costs about $6, weighs almost nothing, and fixes a pinhole in 30 seconds. Without the patch, you are on the ground by 3 a.m., wondering why you did not check the gear bin before you left. Ninth mistake is leaving your tent unzipped while the light is on inside. This sounds like a warning for children until you have done it once as an adult. An illuminated tent opening at dusk or after dark is a beacon for every flying insect in the area. Mosquitoes, moths, gnats, and anything else that navigates by light will find the opening within minutes and the tent interior within seconds. Once they are inside for the rest of the night. I watched this happen to a friend on her first camping trip. She left the zipper open with a headlamp on inside while she went to her car to grab something, came back 2 minutes later, and the tent was full of mosquitoes. She ended up sleeping in her car. I thought it was funny at the time. She did not camp again for 3 years, which is less funny. Close the zipper every time you enter or exit, even if you are planning to go back in 30 seconds. Before dark, check the tent mesh panels for any gaps where the fly does not cover properly. Campgrounds near standing water, creek bottoms, and low spots carry significantly higher mosquito pressure than sites on higher ground with air movement. If site selection is within your control, higher and more open generally beats lower and sheltered when bugs are a concern. The 10th mistake covers water, specifically bringing less than you need, and assuming the campground will cover the rest. Developed campgrounds in national forests often have water spigots, but those spigots are not always operational, not always close to every site, and sometimes shut off for maintenance without advance notice. In summer heat in the Southwest, Water consumption during a day of camp activity runs higher than most people plan for, 2 liters per person. At roughly the volume of a large soda bottle is a minimum daily water requirement under mild conditions. In 90-degree heat, with any physical activity, that number doubles. My recommendation is to carry at least 1 gallon per person per day from home in sealed containers. Treat that as the floor rather than the total supply, and verify in advance whether the campground has potable water currently operational. A quick call to the ranger district or a check of the campground's Reservation.gov listing, which is updated when water systems are offline, takes 3 minutes before the trip and eliminates a category of problem that turns uncomfortable fast in hot conditions. I skipped this call on a trip to the Sam Houston National Forest in East Texas in August several years back. The water system at that campground loop had been shut down for repairs. The next operational water source was a 20-minute drive. That is not a crisis, but it changed every plan for the first day of the trip, and it was entirely avoidable. 11th mistake is not having a rain plan for time spent in camp during the day. A tent is where you sleep. It is not where you spend a full rainy Saturday sitting upright on a sleeping bag with nowhere to go. If you are camping for more than one night, the probability of encountering at least some rain is real enough to plan for. A tarp over your kitchen and sitting area, pitched before the rain arrives rather than during it, gives you a covered workspace and a place to sit out a storm without being inside the tent all day. A Kelty Noah 12, which is a 12-foot by 12-foot tarp, roughly the footprint of a standard parking space, weighs about 2 pounds and goes up in about 8 minutes with 4 stakes and a ridgeline. That setup costs around $40. Pitch it first when you arrive, over the kitchen area, before you do anything else. If it rains, you are already set up. If it does not, you have shade and a defined kitchen space. Either way, it earns its place in the truck. My wife pointed out after our 3rd consecutive trip, where the tarp saved the camp kitchen, that maybe I should put it up before she has to ask. She was right. It now goes up within the first 20 minutes at any site, rainy forecast or not. The 12th mistake is one that almost nobody mentions in these lists, and it is the one that has ended more trips prematurely than any gear failure I have personally witnessed. It is arriving at the campsite without having confirmed the site is actually available and accessible for your specific vehicle and gear setup. Recreation.gov and campground websites list sites as available based on reservation status. They do not always accurately represent site conditions like maximum vehicle length, whether the access road is suitable for low-clearance vehicles, or whether recent weather events like windstorms, flooding, or fire have made the area inaccessible. A site listed as available and reservable in a system can be physically unusable because a tree came down across the access road 3 days before your trip. Calling the ranger district the day before you leave costs 5 minutes and gives you ground truth information that no booking website will have. Ask specifically whether the road to your site is currently passable, whether the water is on, and whether there are any access issues or closures in effect. This call has saved 2 of my trips in the last 5 years. Once when flooding had closed a forest road 2 days before arrival, and once when a campground loop was closed for infrastructure repairs that the Recreation.gov listing had not yet reflected. The Ranger District staff almost always answers the phone during business hours, and they would rather take that 5-minute call than deal with the aftermath of someone showing up at a closed site with a truck full of gear and no backup plan. Here is the one I promised at the beginning of the video. Before you leave the campsite at the end of any trip, do a full perimeter walkthrough counterclockwise. Not the direction you would naturally walk, counterclockwise. The reason is spatial memory. Your brain builds a visual habit of the campsite in the forward direction you have been moving through it all weekend. Walking it counterclockwise gives you an unfamiliar viewing angle of every corner of the space, including the spots behind camp chairs, under picnic table benches, around the base of trees where gear gets leaned and forgotten, and at the far end of the site where things drift over the course of a weekend. A thread on Expedition Portal in the trip report section, specifically about gear left at campsites, had over 60 responses from experienced campers describing things they had found using this exact approach. A headlamp under a rainfly corner, a hatchet left against a tree, car keys left on a table edge. I have found something on a counterclockwise walkthrough that I had missed on a forward pass on probably a third of my trips over the years. It takes 90 seconds. The alternative is realizing you are missing a headlamp or a sleeping pad pump somewhere around mile 50 on the drive home, which is a specific flavor of bad that anyone who has experienced it will immediately recognize. At the end of a camping trip, you either want to look back on it and think about when you are going back, or you want to look back on it and think about everything you would fix if you could do it again. Most of the things on this list are not expensive to fix, and they are not complicated. They are just decisions made before you leave home, or in the first 30 minutes after you arrive at the site. Most of them happen at the point in the planning process where people assume it will work out fine. It usually does, until it does not. Make the 12 decisions on this list consciously before the trip starts, and the rest of it can just be camping, which is the part you actually showed up for. None of these are complicated. They are just the things experienced campers do automatically because they have already paid the tuition on each one. You do not have to pay it again.